In Point Pleasant, West Virginia, there is a myth, as they say, but I call it a legend. Mothman. I am a photographer. I take many pictures of things, mostly people, nature, etc. One day while driving through WV, I saw a bridge. A very large bird thing was on top of it. The thing had bright red eyes as if it wasn't really even a bird. As I researched it, I found out it was called the Mothman, and many other people had seen it as well. A few weeks went by as I wondered about that strange creature. I saw it in my dreams. Then one night while I was shooting pictures of a dark and scary place, I heard something that sounded like it was circling around me, flying. I looked up and all I could see were red eyes, scary eyes. I ran to my car and it followed. As I got back into town, somebody had a shirt on with this creature with those red, scary eyes. I then started wondering if that thing was stalking me, since I had a picture of it, or if it was possibly just wanting something from me. The first picture shows something that somebody found that an Indian had made. So has this Mothman been alive for over 100 years? Is it even possible that it's a man who had something happen to him? This thing chased me in my car. I was going 75, and it was right on top of me. So this thing can fly as fast as my car, and probably even faster. I really don't want to upload my picture of the Mothman, in case something or someone will get frightened or mad. I have 2 pictures of the Mothman. Sadly, I don't want to upload it because they are frightening. Here is a picture I found that looks like the Mothman is hanging from a bridge. Some say that Mothman still lives today near the Golden Gate Bridge. Keep a good eye on him if you live. Beginning in early April 1986, the people in and around the little-known Chernobyl nuclear power plant began to experience a series of strange events revolving around sightings of a mysterious creature described as a large, dark, and mutated man with gigantic wings and piercing red eyes. People affected by this phenomena experienced horrific nightmares, threatening phone calls and first-hand encounters with the winged beast, which became known as the Black Bird of Chernobyl. Reports of these strange happenings continued to increase until the morning of April 26, 1986, when at 1:23 a.m., Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant suffered a catastrophic steam explosion that resulted in a fire which caused a series of additional explosions, followed by a nuclear meltdown. The power plant, located near Pripyat, Ukraine, Soviet Union, spewed a plume of radioactive fallout which drifted over parts of the Western Soviet Union, Eastern and Western Europe, Scandinavia, the UK, Ireland, and Eastern North America. Large areas of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia were badly contaminated, resulting in the evacuation and resettlement of over 336,000 people. The Chernobyl disaster, as the incident was dubbed, is considered the worst accident ever in the history of nuclear power. Following the meltdown and subsequent explosions and fires, Soviet helicopters were dispatched to the scene, equipped with special firefighting gear. These helicopters circled the plant, dropping clay, sand, lead, and other extinguishing chemicals onto the burning facility. Most of the fire was put out by 5M, with the fire burning within Reactor 4 continuing to blaze for several hours after. The firefighters who responded were unaware of the nature of the fire, assuming that it was simply an electrical fire, and received massive overdoses of radiation, leading to many of their deaths, including Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik, who died on May 9, 1986. The workers who survived the initial blast and fire, but would later die of radiation poisoning, claim to have witnessed what has been described as a large, black, bird-like creature with a 20-foot wingspan gliding through the swirling plumes of irradiated smoke pouring from the reactor. No further sightings of the Black Bird of Chernobyl were reported after the Chernobyl disaster, leaving researchers to speculate just what haunted the workers of the plant during the days leading up to the disaster. The most commonly accepted theory suggests that the Black Bird of Chernobyl may have been the same creature spotted in Point Pleasant West Virginia, leading up to the collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15, 1968. Investigators have suggested that the appearance of this creature is an omen of disasters to come in the area in which it shows itself. The physical description of both the blackbird of Chernobyl and the Mothman, the creature sighted in West Virginia, are very similar, and the reports of nightmares and threatening phone calls leading up to these disasters are shared in both cases. A second, less accepted theory suggests that the blackbird of Chernobyl was nothing more than the misidentification of the black stork, an endangered species endemic to southern Eurasia. The black stork stands nearly 3 feet tall and has a wingspan of nearly 6 feet. This theory, however, fails to take into account the menacing phone calls and the disturbing nightmares. Also, the physical description given by the majority of eyewitnesses who actually saw the blackbird of Chernobyl does not in any way match the physical appearance of the black stork. Both the blackbird of Chernobyl and the Mothman have not been sighted since their respective disasters, leaving us with many unanswered questions. All we can do is wait for the beast to show itself again and give us a chance to figure out just what it may be. Unfortunately, it would appear that for this creature to show up again, we will have to anticipate some form of disaster in the area it has selected to appear. At about 7 a.m. on a warm Thursday morning, students on a school bus were shocked by a loud flapping noise just before a large winged creature swooped down over their bus from the sky before going off into the distance. One boy on the bus managed to snap a quick picture of the creature as it flew over a barn before disappearing, but the picture turned out blurry and faint. The picture appeared on the local news that evening. There was discussion over whether it truly was a monster, a bird, a bat, or if it was a hoax. There were wild suggestions saying the creature was the monster from Jeepers Creepers, the Van Meter Visitor, or even Batman. The monster madness ragged on for a week before it began to die down, and then it was forgotten. Dusk was just beginning to fall on a small town in Idaho. Summer had brought forth mosquitoes, which had frightened off many of the townsfolk who were taking refuge inside their homes. In addition to the mosquitoes, there had been vicious murders and violent attacks in the town, so children were forbidden to go out into the streets, and the adults locked their doors. One of the few people outdoors on this warm evening was a man strolling down a paved bike trail. He was going toward his home, but instead found himself trapped on a long, seemingly endless sidewalk between two unrelenting walls of trees, the shadows of which grew longer as the sun set deeper and deeper. These trees were some of many, as the bike trail cut its way through a thick forest like a snake cuts through the grass. The man was lost in his own contemplation on the world, and the only noises were of his own footsteps thudding against the solid concrete. Suddenly, a man with strikingly blonde hair stumbled out of the dense forest foliage and fell onto the sidewalk. He seemed to be terrified. The man noticed this new arrival was clutching a long, bloody knife in one black glove as he trembled on the sidewalk. The man was torn between desire to help him and fear that he would be stabbed. The man with the knife cast him one glance before a loud shriek rang out from the trees he had just emerged from. The shriek was high-pitched, and the man knew it wasn't human. Perhaps an animal of sorts, or maybe. The man described a large humanoid figure with wings appearing in that moment. He tells the creature as having black skin with wide eyes and a gaping mouth drawn open to reveal long, jagged teeth. The creature was similar to a bat, but the man knew this was no bat. The creature swooped down toward the bike trail. The blond man screamed as he swung the short knife blade. The bat seized him with long talons and brought him off into the air as a terrified passenger. The man reported watching the knife fall out of the blond man's hand as the bat flew off into the skies. As the bat flew away, The man remembers hearing the unfortunate passenger's scream slowly fade away as he disappeared. Stunned at what he had just witnessed, the curious man walked into the woods, in the direction the blonde man had emerged from, and found a woman who had been brutally stabbed in several places around her body. He immediately called the police and told them he had found an injured woman. When they arrived with paramedics, the woman was determined to be deceased. With a jolting chill, the man realized that the blonde man with the knife had been the murderer, probably the one behind the murders in town. The man told the police about the murderer and the bat, but they did not believe him. He described the killer, and a police sketch artist drew up a picture of who he described. A few days later, the police found that the man in the drawing had disappeared around the time the woman was found. With no other explanation for the blonde man's disappearance, the man's story started to have reluctant believers. Cassie was home alone. She was having trouble adjusting to her new home, especially in such desolated conditions. Cassie had just moved after being raped near her old house in her old town. After such a foul and unforgivable act, Cassie had abandoned all her friends and her job of 3 years, basically erasing her life to move to the next city over. She had described the rapist to the police, but the man was never found. With lack of success on finding his whereabouts, Cassie could not sleep at night knowing she was not completely sheltered or protected, and she never would be. However, tonight she had to go back to her old house to collect a few boxes of assorted, miscellaneous items she had left behind during the movie. It was a particularly dark night, so she was a bit unsettled and anxious about going out under such conditions. Even the stars seemed to glow a bit dimmer, as if night himself had closed his watchful eyes over the world. It wasn't that she couldn't see well outside, but there was a sense of a dark foretoken. Cassie briefly considered staying in her home for the night, but decided that she wouldn't let something as stupid as fear of the dark stop her. She left her house and got into her car. After a half-hour drive on the highway, Cassie arrived back in her old city and back to her old house. Sure enough, the boxes were still in her garage. Getting out of the car and slamming the door shut, Cassie walked over to the garage and opened it. There weren't that many boxes, and she figured she could fit them all in the back of her car and in the trunk. Sighing at the thought of manual labor, Cassie began to carry the boxes individually to her car. She had just gotten the last one in her car when she saw her former next-door neighbor in his backyard, setting up a sprinkler. Cassie blinked and looked a little closer. It was a bit difficult to see in the blind night. She had never paid much attention to that neighbor before. Cassie looked closely at him, and with a terrified chill, she recognized him. The neighbor noticed her and discarded the sprinkler onto the grass, where it released a few short bursts of water before going lifeless. He stared at her menacingly, even though a large grin grew along his face. He began to walk over and Cassie stumbled backwards, nearly tripping on her own feet in her haste to get away. Her neighbor was the rapist. He advanced on her, the grin growing wider. Cassie was just about to turn and run, but he had gotten close enough to lunge out and grasp her roughly by her wrist. Cassie tried to scream, but only a frightened squeak came out. Cassie tried to fight, but only succeeded in falling to the ground while he kept a tight hold on her wrist. Cassie looked into his eyes, and she knew what was about to happen. She tried to fight it even harder this time, but he wouldn't let go. He smirked down at her, and then he was gone. Her wrist was jerked up toward the sky for a second, and then his tight grip was released. Cassie looked at the spot where he had been standing, and then looked up into the sky. She observed a large bat-like creature carrying him off. The night was silent except for the blood pounding in her ears and the flapping of the creature's wings for a few moments. And then he began to scream. Cassie gained a small bit of pleasure from hearing him scream, so devastated and terror-stricken. She felt guilty about feeling that way, and the feelings of guilt overwhelmed her sick satisfaction. She watched the bat tote him off as he continued screaming, now throwing his head to the sides, in either an effort to break free or denying that it was really happening. When they had gone off into the distance, Cassie got into her car and left. The night now seemed significantly brighter. Reports of a large winged creature have appeared all over the globe, dating back to even the beginning of the modern age. It is believed the creature actually is the Van Meta visitor, the Mothman, and Olitiao. It was said in ancient times that the bat-like creature would appear to take away those who have done wrong. Those who believe the creature is still around debate whether it is a god, an angel, or a demon, while reports of the bat-like figure are conflicting. Most of them agree that those attacked by the bat are bad people, such as murderers and rapists.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.